#script. Imagine sitting in a quiet room, reading the last words someone ever wrote. Now imagine reading those same exact words again, in a note written by someone else, in a different country, a decade later. And then again. And again. 23 times. 23 people, spread across 3 countries and 3 decades, all writing the same 127 words before they died. Words that don't exist anywhere else. Not in any book. Not on any website. Not in any song, any film, any poem ever catalogued by any database on Earth. 127 words that seem to have come from nowhere, written by people who had no connection to one another, no shared history, no shared geography, no shared anything, except for the fact that they all chose to include this paragraph in the last thing they would ever write. A forensic linguist found the pattern. She published her findings. And then she, and her work, simply vanished from the academic record. This is a story about language, about death, and about a discovery that someone, somewhere, apparently did not want the rest of us to see. Let me tell you what we know. And more importantly, let me tell you what we don't. Forensic linguistics is not a field most people think about. It exists in the space between crime scenes and grammar, between courtrooms and clause structure. Forensic linguists analyze ransom notes, threatening letters, disputed confessions, and, sometimes, the final written words of the dead. Suicide notes are studied for a variety of reasons: to confirm authenticity, to detect coercion, to identify forgeries in cases where foul play is suspected. The language of a genuine suicide note has certain characteristics. There are patterns to how people write when they know they are about to die. Forensic linguists know these patterns the way a cardiologist knows the rhythm of a healthy heart. They can spot when something is off. And in 2024, something was very, very off. The researcher's name was listed on a preprint uploaded to an open-access academic archive in early 2024. She was described as a forensic linguistics researcher affiliated with the University of British Columbia. Her study was ambitious in scope: a systematic linguistic analysis of over 2,000 suicide notes sourced from public coroner records across 5 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. The stated goal was to identify cross-cultural patterns in the language of final communications, looking at everything from sentence structure to word frequency to emotional tone markers. Standard academic work, if unusually large in scale. The kind of study that might get cited in a few journals and discussed at a conference or two. But buried in the findings was something that should have made international headlines. 23 of the notes she analyzed contained an identical paragraph. 127 words. Not similar. Not paraphrased. Not loosely resembling each other the way certain ideas or phrases sometimes echo across unrelated documents. Identical. Word for word. Character for character. The same paragraph, recurring across notes written between 1987 and 2019. The writers ranged in age from 19 to 67. They lived in cities and small towns scattered across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Some were men. Some were women. Different races. Different professions. Different socio-economic backgrounds. There was no evidence that any of them had ever met, corresponded, or shared any social circle, online community, or organizational affiliation. And yet, there it was. The same 127 words, sitting inside the most personal documents a human being can produce. Here are the 5 things that made this discovery almost impossible to explain. First, the time span. The earliest note containing the paragraph was dated 1987. The most recent was from 2019. That is 32 years. Whatever the source of this paragraph was, it predated the modern internet. It predated social media. It predated the World Wide Web as a consumer technology. People didn't copy and paste text in 1987. They wrote things down by hand or typed them on typewriters. The earliest notes in the dataset were handwritten, and according to the preprint, the paragraph appeared to have been written in the same hand as the rest of the note. Not copied mechanically. Written, as though from memory. Or from something worse than memory. Second, the geographic spread. The 23 notes came from locations with no obvious connection. Small towns in the American Midwest. Suburbs in southeast England. A coastal city in Australia. The geographic distribution was essentially random. If this were a meme, a chain letter, a shared piece of text circulating through some subculture, you would expect clustering. You would expect geographic or demographic concentration. There was none. Third, the text itself. The preprint described the paragraph but, critically, did not reproduce it in full. The researcher cited ethical guidelines regarding the publication of suicide note content, which is standard in this field. But she did describe its linguistic properties. She noted that the paragraph was written in English, in a tone she characterized as calm, almost instructional. It did not express despair. It did not express anger, regret, or farewell. She described it as reading more like a recitation than a confession. Like someone repeating something they had been told. And she noted one additional detail that has haunted me since I first read about this: the paragraph, she said, did not feel like it was written for the reader of the note. It felt like it was written for someone else entirely. Some other audience. She did not speculate about who. Fourth, the absence of any source. The researcher ran the paragraph through every plagiarism database, full textbook archive, song lyric repository, film script database, and web crawl index she could access. Nothing. 127 words, apparently original, apparently unique, appearing nowhere in the entire indexed record of human expression, except inside the suicide notes of 23 dead strangers. Think about that for a moment. In the age of the internet, in an era where virtually every written phrase ever committed to paper or screen has been digitized and catalogued, this paragraph has no origin. It exists only in the context of death. Fifth, and this is where the story changes, the disappearance. Within weeks of the preprint being uploaded, it was withdrawn from the archive. No explanation was given. This is unusual. Academic preprints are removed for specific reasons: ethical violations, data fabrication, legal threats, authorial request. Typically, a notice is left in place of the paper, explaining the nature of the withdrawal. In this case, there was nothing. The paper simply ceased to exist on the server. Around the same time, the researcher's faculty page at the University of British Columbia was taken down. Not updated. Not modified. Removed entirely. Searches for her name in the university's directory returned nothing. Her profiles on academic networking sites went dark. No statement was issued by the university. No retraction notice appeared in any journal. No other researchers in her department made any public comment. She was simply no longer there, as though the institution had decided that this person and her work should quietly stop existing. I want to be careful here. I am not claiming that something conspiratorial happened. People leave academic positions for many reasons. Papers are withdrawn for many reasons. But the convergence is difficult to ignore. A researcher publishes a finding that, if verified, would represent one of the most disturbing and inexplicable linguistic anomalies ever documented. And then, in quick succession, the paper vanishes, her institutional presence vanishes, and nobody says a word about it. The silence is, in some ways, more unsettling than the finding itself. Because here is what keeps me awake about this. We are not talking about a statistical anomaly. We are not talking about a vague resemblance or a debatable pattern. We are talking about 127 identical words in 23 documents written by dead people. And the only person who formally identified the pattern has been effectively erased from the academic landscape. Let me walk you through the scenarios, because the explanations that come to mind are each, in their own way, deeply disturbing. Scenario 1, the paragraph is a fabrication. The researcher invented the data, the anomaly was faked, and the paper was withdrawn because it was fraudulent. This is the most mundane explanation, and in some ways the most comforting. But it doesn't account for the removal of her university page, the total silence from UBC, or the absence of any formal retraction statement. Academic fraud is exposed publicly. It is discussed, debated, investigated by committees. It generates news coverage. It does not simply vanish. Scenario 2, the paragraph is real, and it circulated through some undocumented subculture or network that has never been publicly identified. Some hidden community, spanning decades and continents, sharing this text as part of a ritual, a pact, or a belief system that we do not yet understand. This would imply the existence of a group that has operated for at least 32 years across 3 countries, influencing vulnerable people and leaving behind a linguistic signature in their final words. If this is the case, the implications are horrifying, and the suppression of the research becomes an obstruction of what should be a criminal investigation. Scenario 3, the paragraph is real, its source is unknown, and its recurrence has no explanation that fits within our current understanding of how information moves between people. This is the scenario that no one wants to talk about. Because it suggests something about the nature of language, or consciousness, or death, that we are not prepared to confront. That certain words can exist without an author. That certain phrases can appear in the minds of unconnected people across time and space, surfacing only in the final moments before self-annihilation. I don't know what to call that. I don't think anyone does. There is one more detail I haven't mentioned. In the preprints methodology section, the researcher noted that she had initially identified the paragraph in just 3 notes and expanded her dataset specifically to see if it appeared elsewhere. She described the moment of finding the 4th match as, and I am paraphrasing from memory, since the paper is no longer accessible, the most profoundly disturbing experience of her academic career. She wrote that she stopped sleeping well after the 7th match. By the 15th, she had contacted colleagues in adjacent fields to verify that she was not losing her mind. They confirmed the matches. She kept searching. She found 23 notes. 127 words. No source. No explanation. No researcher left standing to ask about it. I have spent more time on this than I probably should. I have searched for cached versions of the preprint. I have looked for the researcher's name on every platform I can think of. I have emailed the University of British Columbia's Linguistics Department. I have contacted the archive where the paper was hosted. I have received no substantive response from anyone. And I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that there may be a perfectly rational, perfectly boring explanation for all of this that I simply haven't found yet. But I keep coming back to the 23 notes. I keep coming back to the 127 words. And I keep asking myself a question that I cannot answer. If you sat down to write the last thing you would ever write, and you found words rising in your mind that you didn't recognize, words that felt like they belonged to someone else, would you write them down? Would you even know they weren't yours? The paragraph is out there. Somewhere, in coroner archives and evidence boxes and dusty municipal records across 3 countries, those 23 notes still exist. The words are still there. The pattern is still there, whether anyone is willing to study it or not. And there is no reason to believe that it stopped in 2019. No reason at all. What do you think really happened? Was this a hoax that spiraled out of control? Evidence of something organized and sinister? Or something we don't have a name for yet? Leave your theory below. I want to hear what you think, because right now, I don't have an answer. And I'm not sure anyone does.